He stepped onto the stage trembling, a shy teenager in a baggy suit, nervously clutching the hand of his duet partner. The audience chuckled. The judges braced themselves. No one expected what happened next. As Jonathan Antoine opened his mouth to sing, a voice so pure, powerful, and haunting erupted that it stopped the world in its tracks. Within minutes, millions were calling him the next Pavarotti. But while the world applauded, Jonathan was fighting a much darker battle, one with himself. Behind that angelic voice was a young man grappling with severe anxiety, depression, bullying, and a lifelong struggle with identity. What the cameras didn't show was his slow unraveling, and eventual transformation. Today, he is not just a survivor of the brutal world of fame, but a symbol of resilience, creativity, and authenticity. This is the untold story of Jonathan Antoine, not the performer, but the person behind the voice. Jonathan Antoine was born on January 13, 1995, in Hainaut, Essex, a quiet suburb east of London. From the outside, his childhood seemed ordinary. He was the youngest of two children in a supportive family, raised by his father John, a police inspector, and his mother Tracy, who worked as a housewife. But even in those early years, Jonathan sensed he was different. While other boys were fixated on football and video games, Jonathan found himself enchanted by music, especially classical melodies that played from old CDs his parents kept in the living room. By age 4, he could hum full symphonies by memory. His emotional sensitivity was striking, sometimes mistaken for weakness. School, rather than being a haven for creativity, became a battlefield. Jonathan was overweight and wore his emotions on his sleeve, a dangerous combination for a boy in the unforgiving world of schoolyards. The bullying was merciless. Students called him names, laughed at his appearance, and mocked his interest in opera. He started to withdraw into himself, developing severe social anxiety. He would often hide in the bathrooms during breaks, silently mouthing opera arias to keep himself calm. At night, he'd cry silently, wondering if he'd ever feel truly accepted. His self-esteem plummeted so low that by the time he turned 13, Jonathan no longer believed he was worth anything. "I wasn't living," he would later say in an interview. "I was just existing, waiting for it to be over." But there was one place he felt alive: the music room. West Hatch High School had an unusually supportive music department. It was there he met Jenny Ewington, a vocal coach who recognized Jonathan's raw potential. Jenny was stunned by the richness and resonance of his tenor voice. She compared it to that of a fully trained adult, uncommon for someone so young. Abilities. It wasn't overnight, but music became a lifeline. For every cruel comment hurled at him in the hallway, there was an aria that reminded him of his strength. His voice, delicate, powerful, and utterly unique, was the one part of himself he never doubted. His turning point came during a school recital, where he was paired with fellow student Charlotte Giaconelli to perform "The Prayer." The performance was magical, a perfect blend of Jonathan's booming operatic tenor and Charlotte's crisp soprano. The audience was stunned. Encouraged by their teachers and families, the duo submitted an audition tape to Britain's Got Talent. What they didn't realize was that they were about to walk into one of the most life-altering moments of their lives, and that the real test wasn't the audition itself, but what came after it. Was 2012. The producers of Britain's Got Talent received a humble audition tape from two teenagers, Jonathan Antoine and Charlotte Giaconelli, singing "The Prayer." They were invited to perform in front of the judges at the London Coliseum. The day of the audition, Jonathan was terrified. His anxiety was so overwhelming that he nearly didn't go on stage. In interviews, he later confessed that he had told Charlotte, "You go on without me." But Charlotte refused. She reassured him, saying, "We're in this together." As the curtain opened, the audience sized them up quickly. Charlotte stood composed and confident. Jonathan, on the other hand, looked uncomfortable, his long curly hair partially shielding his face. Simon Cowell's expression was skeptical the moment he saw Jonathan. To many, the visual contrast between the two was striking, and not in Jonathan's favor. It was a moment loaded with expectation and quiet ridicule. The moment Jonathan sang the first line, everything changed. His voice, soaring, powerful, and emotionally charged, shocked the room into silence. The disbelief on the judges' faces was mirrored by the audience's stunned reaction. Simon Cowell raised his eyebrows, Amanda Holden clutched her chest, and the audience broke into cheers before the song was even finished. When the final note faded, a standing ovation erupted. Simon Cowell, known for his brutally honest assessments, admitted he had misjudged them the moment they walked on stage. "This is what I think," he said after their performance. "Charlotte, I think you're good. Jonathan, you are unbelievable." It was a blunt but telling statement, one that would later haunt the duo's identity as a pair. Nonetheless, they moved forward in the competition, their audition video going viral within days. Within a week, they were global sensations. The video racked up over 10 million views, trending not just in the UK but across the United States, Europe, and Asia. Jonathan's voice was being compared to Pavarotti and Andrea Bocelli. Headlines called him the new face of opera, and his personal story of overcoming bullying and anxiety resonated deeply with millions, but behind the scenes, the sudden spotlight was overwhelming. Jonathan wasn't used to attention, let alone adoration. He found it difficult to process the avalanche of praise, fearing he would never live up to the expectations. He was also keenly aware that, despite being a duo, the media often spotlighted him alone, referring to Charlotte as his partner rather than a co-star. The imbalance weighed on both of them, but neither said anything publicly. Throughout the competition, Jonathan and Charlotte continued to impress. Their semi-final performance of Caruso drew more praise, and they sailed into the finals. There, they performed The Prayer once again, returning to the song that had launched their journey. Though they finished in second place, losing to Dancing Dog act Ashley and Pudsey, their impact was undeniable. Simon Cowell signed them to his label, Psycho Music, with a £1 million record deal. Their debut album, Together, released shortly after the show, went gold. They performed on major stages, appeared on international talk shows, and even sang at the Queen's Jubilee concert. For Jonathan, the fairy tale had come true. He was no longer the bullied outcast from Essex. He was a star, but fairy tales, especially those forged in reality TV, often hide shadows. As the spotlight grew brighter, so did the cracks in Jonathan's confidence, and the weight of being seen only through his voice, not his full self. Fame had opened doors, yes. But it had also opened wounds he wasn't yet ready to confront. Absolutely. After Britain's Got Talent, Jonathan Antoine and Charlotte Giaconelli became household names. Their debut album Together shot to number 5 on the UK albums chart and was certified gold. Their fanbase exploded, particularly among classical crossover audiences who were captivated by the unlikely duo. On stage, they were polished and powerful. But behind the curtain, Jonathan's mental and emotional struggles deepened. Fame had placed him under a magnifying glass. His appearance was still discussed more often than his voice. Tabloids couldn't resist comparing the shy, overweight opera boy to the stereotypical pop star. Though the public adored him, the comments stung. Jonathan had spent most of his life trying to disappear. Now, he couldn't walk into a grocery store without someone recognizing him. The anxiety that once kept him hidden now clashed with the pressure to be constantly present. Charlotte, ever composed, was growing more confident in the spotlight. Jonathan, however, felt like he was playing a part written for someone else. Even his body felt foreign to him. He began to spiral, retreating into isolation, struggling with depression, and battling panic attacks. He was only 17. He later described this period as emotionally destructive. the pressure to maintain the public's perception of him. A sweet, talented prodigy, conflicted with the storm raging inside. His insecurities about his weight, his identity, and his purpose became harder to suppress. He began seeing a therapist and was diagnosed with generalized anxiety and depressive disorders. Amid this, he and Charlotte recorded a second album, Perhaps Love, in 2013. It was a commercial success, reaching number 5 once again and receiving critical acclaim. But for Jonathan, the magic was fading. He had become trapped in a brand, Jonathan and Charlotte, that no longer reflected who he was or who he wanted to become. He loved Charlotte dearly, but their paths were diverging. In 2014, with the support of their management and each other, Jonathan and Charlotte announced they would be pursuing solo careers. It was a difficult but necessary decision. Charlotte would go on to release pop-oriented material, while Jonathan committed himself to a more classical path. For Jonathan, this marked both a professional pivot and a personal rebirth. No longer tied to anyone else's vision, he began asking bigger questions. Who am I when I'm not singing? What does it mean to truly heal? He took a break from the spotlight and began investing in therapy, vocal training, and self-discovery. This wasn't about stepping away from music. It was about coming home to himself. Breaking away from the duo wasn't just a career move for Jonathan Antoine, it was an emotional leap into the unknown. He was no longer half of a phenomenon. Now, he stood alone as an artist, a brand, and a man trying to reclaim his identity. For the first time, he had full creative control, but with that came the full weight of expectation. Jonathan's first solo album, Tenore, released in 2014, was a declaration. It was a carefully curated collection of arias and sacred pieces, songs that reflected his love for classical music and his deepening connection to the genre's spiritual roots. Critics praised the album for its maturity. Gone was the teen prodigy. In his place stood a young tenor with emotional range and vocal discipline far beyond his years, but even more than the music, what stood out was Jonathan's transformation. He had begun focusing on his health, not in pursuit of the perfect image, but for mental clarity and strength. He worked with vocal coaches, therapists, and nutritionists. Slowly, he learned to replace self-loathing with self-respect. It was a journey marked by setbacks and breakthroughs. There were days he struggled to get out of bed, and others where he'd spend hours refining a single phrase of a Puccini aria. Behind the scenes, Jonathan was evolving into a thoughtful, self-aware adult. He immersed himself in literature, philosophy, and mindfulness practices. He began writing journals, reflecting on fame, pain, and healing. In interviews, he became more open about his mental health, something few classical artists ever did. He spoke candidly about bullying, depression, and the pressures of body image. Fans, especially young ones, found solace in his honesty. His second solo album, Believe, 2016, was a creative and emotional step forward. Unlike Tenore, which leaned heavily into traditional operatic territory, Believe embraced cinematic and crossover styles. It featured inspirational pieces like Empty Chairs at Empty Tables and Bring Him Home, blending vulnerability with vocal grandeur. The album charted well and earned him a loyal following in the US, where classical crossover artists like Josh Groban and Andrea Bocelli had paved the way. Jonathan began touring solo, performing at sold-out venues from London to Toronto. With every concert, he seemed to shed a layer of the shy teenager who once hid behind his hair. He smiled more, spoke more, even joked with the audience. He no longer saw himself as someone who just got lucky on a reality show. He was now an artist with purpose, skill, and something to say, but the journey wasn't without its tests. Being a solo performer meant navigating the harsh world of music marketing, brand management, and online criticism alone. There were weeks when he questioned if he could keep up the pace. Still, he stayed grounded in his mission, to connect, to heal, and to inspire. And above all, to protect the boy he once was, the one who almost didn't go on stage that day, Jonathan began advocating for mental health awareness, often speaking at schools and in interviews about the importance of therapy and self-acceptance. In one memorable quote, he said, "Your voice is not just something you use to sing. It's what you use to speak your truth." That idea became a recurring theme in his music, and in his evolving legacy. By the late 2010s, Jonathan was no longer defined by a viral video or his struggles. He was carving out a space uniquely his own, one built on resilience, vulnerability, and an ever-deepening love for the power of song. Today, Jonathan Antoine is a man transformed. Not just in voice, but in presence, in peace, and in purpose. Now in his late 20s, he's no longer just the opera singer from BGT. He's an international recording artist, mental health advocate, and a deeply reflective human being who carries the scars of his past with grace and pride. Though he still performs globally, often to sold-out theaters in the UK, North America, and beyond, Jonathan has found a healthier balance between his art and his personal life. He no longer pushes himself to the point of burnout. He surrounds himself with a small, supportive team. And perhaps most importantly, he listens to himself, his mind, his body, and his spirit. One of the biggest changes in recent years has been Jonathan's approach to love, both self-love and romantic relationships. He's spoken openly about how, for a long time, he didn't feel worthy of love. But through years of inner work, therapy, and simply growing up, he's allowed himself to experience affection without shame. Though he remains private about his dating life, he's hinted at being in a stable relationship, one built not on fame or fantasy, but on mutual respect and understanding. Jonathan has also become more active online, engaging directly with fans, sharing his thoughts on music, life, and mental health. He's not afraid to post selfies without filters. He'll talk about bad days as freely as he celebrates good ones. That transparency has endeared him to a new generation of followers who admire not just his voice, but his vulnerability. In 2020, he released Going the Distance, his most ambitious album yet. It included operatic classics as well as genre-defying covers, from Queen to contemporary film scores. It was a sonic portrait of the man he'd become, unboxed, untamed, and unafraid. The album was both a critical and fan favorite, further solidifying Jonathan's place not just in the classical world, but as a crossover icon in his own right. When asked what success means to him today, Jonathan doesn't mention fame, record sales, or applause. He speaks instead about stillness. About waking up and feeling at peace. About using his platform to remind others that you're not broken just because you feel different. That, he believes, is his truest calling. That he may have started as a teenage sensation, but Jonathan Antoine's legacy isn't built on virality. It's built on resilience. On choosing courage over comfort. And on using one's voice, not just to hit high notes, but to tell the truth. Certainly. Jonathan Antoine's story is not just one of extraordinary talent, it's a testament to what it means to survive, to evolve, and to truly live. He didn't just overcome stage fright, he conquered the crushing weight of public scrutiny, self-doubt, and emotional pain. What could have been a fleeting moment of fame became a lifelong mission to prove that you don't need to be perfect to be powerful. He gave voice to the silenced child within so many of us, the one who was mocked for being different, told they were too much, or not enough. His journey has become a mirror for those navigating identity, healing, and purpose. And while he may stand on grand stages singing arias written centuries ago, his true power lies in his ability to make ancient songs feel intimately personal and deeply human. In a world obsessed with filters, fame, and fast results, Jonathan reminds us that true greatness often blooms quietly, nurtured by pain, patience, and authenticity. His legacy isn't just recorded in albums or YouTube views, it's etched in the hearts of those he's inspired to stand taller, speak louder, and feel more deeply. As he once said, music is what connects us when words fail. Jonathan Antoine didn't just find his voice, he helped the rest of us find ours too. If Jonathan's journey moved you, if his courage, his voice, and his truth inspired something deep within you, then don't let this be the end of the story. Subscribe to the channel and join us as we uncover more untold journeys of resilience, passion, and greatness. One voice at a time.